How do you turn the glamorous streets of Monaco from this into this? Nestled in the heart of the French Riviera lies one of the most iconic racing spectacles in the world. For one weekend only, thousands of fans descend into the tiny principality to watch 20 Formula 1 drivers navigate the tight street circuit at heart-racing speeds. But the Monaco Grand Prix isn't just a prestigious race, it's a transformation. Thousands of temporary structures are constructed in order to host the event. This includes the pit garages, hospitality suites, media centres, grandstands, and so much more. You've seen Red Bull's iconic Energy Station before, haven't you? Where Daniel Ricciardo did his post-win pool dive. Well, that's also a very complex temporary build, but we'll come back to that later. To put in perspective just how big of a transformation it is, Monaco has a population close to 36,000 people. It's estimated that over 200,000 people will arrive into the country, more than 5 times its population. So the question is, how do they do it? And how do they do it in just 6 weeks whilst keeping some of the busiest streets in the country open for its residents? But before we get into that, since when did Formula 1 race at Monaco? Racing in the Principality began on April 14th, 1929, having been organised by the president of the Automobile Club de Monaco, Anthony Nogues. He now has a grandstand named after him. The winner of the first race, William Grover Williams, drove a Bugatti Type 35B, and he pocketed a whopping 100,000 French francs. It joined the F1 calendar a little over 20 years later in 1950, with the maiden winner going to Juan Manuel Fangio, a man who would go on to win 5 world championships and become one of F1's most decorated drivers. Not long after, British driver Graham Hill became known as the King of Monaco after winning it 5 times in the 1960s. But for most F1 fans, when they hear the words Monaco Grand Prix, they think of Ayrton Senna. He holds the record for most victories at the street circuit, that being 6, including 5 consecutive wins between 1989 and 1993. The track layout has had a few modifications in its 74-year history, but what has changed the most is everything around it, making the setup operation much larger. The most obvious example of this is the safety standards. Until 1969, when the first Armco barriers were installed, if a driver went off the track, they would crash into whatever was there, that be a building, a tree, or even a lamppost. They pretty much just raced on the normal streets minus the parked cars. Thankfully, by 1972, the circuit was almost entirely Armco-lined. To make sure the whole track is protected, both for the drivers and the spectators, 21 kilometres of safety rails are installed, around 1 kilometre of Tech Pro barriers, approximately 20,000 square metres of wire netting, over 3,000 protection tyres, and finally 800 fire extinguishers, one for every 15 metres of track. And then during the race itself, there are more than 2,000 people situated around the track. This mostly comprises of volunteers like the marshals and stewards, but also people like police and doctors who are paid. But considering the circuit hasn't changed much, so the corners are still tight, but now the cars are much bigger, it remains a very dangerous track for the drivers to navigate. Carrying on with the theme of safety, the roads need to be perfectly smooth. Any imperfection in the 3.37 kilometre track, which the drivers reach a maximum speed of 290 kilometers per hour on, could cause a very serious accident, something the new Las Vegas street circuit knows all too well. Rightfully so, the FIA have stringent standards on what condition the road needs to be in for the race weekend. But this creates the first logistical dilemma. The streets the drivers race on are used every day by the residents of Monaco, so in an effort to cause as little disruption as possible, in the 4 weeks leading up to the race, they do most of the road resurfacing at night time. Each year, they usually resurface around a third of the track. The roads are also a lot more accessible than other street circuits. Each day, the roads are closed somewhere between 6 AM to 7:30 AM, but are back open between 6 PM and 9 PM. Even though it's a small window, this still allows for some passage through the track, unlike street circuits like Singapore, which are closed for the whole race weekend. Just below the pit garages, they literally have a nightclub on the track which anybody can walk up to. As we've already touched on, one of the main issues with setting up a Formula 1 race in Monaco is its size. It's smaller than a lot of people realise. The whole country could fit inside New York's Central Park. This means that there's not a lot of room to build all of the temporary facilities on site. This is why most of them are brought into the country by over 600 trucks and trains from storage facilities in Nice and Italy. Another benefit of being built away from site is that it also reduces the setup time. The whole operation begins roughly 6 weeks before the race. The pit garages specifically arrive in 120 different sections, which a crane pieces together almost like Lego. By the time they're completed, they provide teams with the same technology and needs as their permanent counterparts at other tracks. Michael Ferry, who is a vice president of the ACM, said the biggest challenge is building the race control tower. Inside of it, you have TV, FOM, FIA, ACM, emergency services, and so on. That's a lot of people with a lot of different technology requirements. The 1,000 tons of grandstands are also, of course, temporary. Due to the nature of being a tight street circuit, there are a limited amount of places to build them, which means Monaco has the smallest capacity of all Formula 1 races at just 37,000. The amount of people watching the race, though, is much higher, as hotels and apartments overlooking the track all sell their balconies. These packages may be less affordable for the average F1 fan, though. Then there are, of course, the iconic yachts lined up in the harbour section of the track, which again, don't come cheap. But one of the most mind-blowing temporary structures at the Monaco Grand Prix is the Red Bull Energy Station. Red Bull's Energy Station became an iconic part of Formula 1 when Daniel Ricciardo did a celebratory belly flop after his win at Monaco in 2018. But many fans aren't aware that this is also a temporary structure. When designing the energy station, Red Bull needed it to be transportable as it's used in 9 different locations across Europe, but also it needed to be built in just 32 working hours. To reach these goals, every part that makes up the build is packed away in order, so when they are unpacking it, that part can be added on straight away to maximise efficiency. For example, every load-bearing beam can be attached within 7 minutes. On top of that, most of the cabling and infrastructure is already pre-built into the walls. The build becomes even more remarkable when you realise that 250,000 kilograms of timber, 48,000 bolts, 85 windows and 15,000 kilograms of glass are assembled in less than a week. Building the energy station for Monaco, however, adds one more layer of complexity. Due to the space restrictions in the harbour, the energy station has to be built on a floating barge in Imperia, Italy. It then has to be hauled 20 nautical miles down the Mediterranean coast to Monaco. At this point, the harbour master and a team of pilots help steer the 300,000 kilogram barge past the expensive yachts and into position. Finally, the team on the ground comes in to make sure it's ready to host the drivers, teams and VIP guests. This includes 40,000 cans of Red Bull, a kitchen to deliver 13,000 meals, and also the F1 cars on show. I was lucky enough to visit the energy station in 2022, and it really is as cool as you think it would be. And just like that, the tiny country of Monaco builds enough infrastructure for nearly 6 times its population, hosts a Formula 1 race, and within 3 weeks returns to the glamorous streets that billionaires from around the world call their playground. The atmosphere that fills the streets around Monaco on race weekend is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Often walking around the streets is more fun than watching the race itself. If you enjoyed this video, you would love the one I made about the Las Vegas Grand Prix, or choose this video which YouTube thinks you might like.